I don't want a useless old woman here while I'm pregnant. Chelsea's words cut through the living room like a shard of glass. She didn't even look at me. Her eyes stayed glued to her phone, thumbs scrolling, lips curled in that faint smirk that always told me she believed she'd won. Beside her, my son Brian shifted uncomfortably, but nodded anyway. Mom, you should find a new place to live. His tone was matter of fact, as if he was asking me to pass the salt, not tossing his 64-year-old mother into the street. Something inside me shattered. Not loudly, not visibly. More like porcelain cracking behind my ribs. Unseen, but irreparable. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Because this story isn't about a useless old woman. It's about what happens when people mistake quiet sacrifice for weakness, and how wrong they are. 6 months earlier, I had sold my 3-bedroom home, the house where I'd raised Brian alone after his father walked out. 30 years of memories reduced to boxes so that I could hand my only son the down payment for his dream house. It's temporary, Mom, Brian had promised, wrapping his arms around me. Just until we get on our feet. Temporary had stretched into half a year. Half a year of me living in their converted garage, paying them rent as though I were a stranger. Half a year of me cooking their dinners, folding their laundry, running errands, while Chelsea complained to her friends on the phone about having a built-in maid. I told myself it was worth it. Chelsea's pregnancy had been difficult, and I thought my hands calloused from years of helping my late husband with wiring, drywall, and floors were finally useful again. I believed I was helping. I believed I was wanted. But that morning stripped away every illusion. Chelsea finally looked up from her phone, her expression as cold as the iced coffee sweating on the table. "We need the garage for the baby's nursery," she said. "That's not really our problem where you go, Dorothy. There are senior communities. Nice places. You'll meet people your own age." 64. To her, that was ancient. To Brian, it was easier to nod than to defend me. I stood there, clutching the edge of the counter. Around me, the house I'd partly paid for gleamed with polished wood floors I'd helped install. The framed photos on the wall, all of them, Chelsea's choice, showed smiling faces at barbecues, vacations, baby showers. Not a single picture included me. That was my reward after decades of sacrifice. To be erased, dismissed, discarded like an old appliance that had outlived its usefulness. But here's the thing about being underestimated your whole life. You learn to keep your cards close. And I had cards they didn't know about. "Fine," I said calmly, almost sweetly. "I'll be out by the weekend." Chelsea smirked, convinced she'd won. Brian exhaled, relieved. Neither of them noticed the small smile tugging at my lips as I turned back toward the garage, because they thought they'd thrown me out. They had no idea I'd already planned my exit. The weekend came faster than they expected. 3 days later, a moving truck rumbled into the driveway of 1247 Maple Street, and Chelsea's smirk collapsed into shock. "You found a place that fast?" Brian asked, standing on the porch in his wrinkled work shirt. Genuine surprise flickered across his face, like the idea that his mother could survive without him had never occurred to him. I handed the movers another box of my belongings, what little I had left after selling my house. "Amazing what you can accomplish when you're motivated," I said sweetly. Chelsea's hand tightened on her belly, her eyes narrowing as if she could sniff out some hidden agenda. She wasn't wrong. The truth was, I had been preparing for this moment ever since she started treating me like unpaid staff. I had signed a lease on a small but cozy apartment downtown. Nothing fancy, no sprawling backyard, no gleaming countertops, but it was mine. Mine. Bright, clean, and free of whispered complaints and cold stares. As the movers loaded the last of my boxes, I caught Chelsea watching me from the kitchen window. Her face was twisted into something that almost looked like regret. Almost. But regret doesn't erase cruelty. Brian hovered nearby, fidgeting with his car keys. Mom, maybe we were hasty. If you want to stay, I cut him off with a sugary smile. No, thank you, dear. You made your position quite clear. I wouldn't want to be a burden. The guilt hit him then. I saw it in the way his shoulders slumped, the way his eyes darted away. Good. Let him stew in it. By the time I climbed into my car and drove off, I felt lighter than I had in years. My new apartment was waiting, and so was something else. An opportunity. 2 days later, as I unpacked my books and arranged them on a shelf, the phone rang. Dorothy Mitchell? A crisp, professional voice asked. Yes. This is Sarah Chen from Hudson Properties. I'm calling to confirm your references checked out. Mr. Hudson is very pleased to have you join us as a property manager. I sank into my favorite armchair, smiling. Wonderful. When do we begin? Tomorrow, if you're available. He's particularly interested in a property on Maple Street. 1247 Maple Street. My heart did a little dance. My lips curved into a steady, practiced smile. Oh, yes, I said softly. I'm very familiar with that property. Here's what Brian and Chelsea never understood. When they kicked me out, they weren't cutting me off. They were cutting themselves off from the only shield they had against the storm they didn't even know was coming. And I was about to make sure they felt every drop of that storm. The coffee shop 3 blocks from my apartment smelled of roasted beans and fresh ambition. I arrived early, my notebook tucked neatly into my bag, though I already knew every detail of the conversation I was about to have. Dorothy? The man approaching extended a firm hand. Mid-40s, sharp navy suit, a watch that cost more than my first car. This was Will Hudson, developer, businessman, predator of opportunity. His confident smile suggested he rarely heard the word no. Mr. Hudson. I shook his hand, steady as steel. Please. Call me Will. I've reviewed your paperwork. Your knowledge of this neighborhood is exactly what we need. We sat by the window, the spring sunlight spilling across the table. He opened a sleek tablet, swiping through photos and property records. And then I saw at my son's house, 1247 Maple Street, staring back at me in glossy digital clarity. You mentioned this property might be available, Will said. His tone casual but his eyes sharp. I sipped my coffee slowly, choosing my words with care. They're young parents, first-time homeowners. From what I've observed, they're financially stretched. Not a lie. Between Chelsea's shopping addiction and Brian's beer habit, they lived paycheck to paycheck. And the property condition? I leaned back, letting a shadow of amusement cross my face. The garage has been converted into living space, but I doubt it was done with proper permits. Will's eyebrows lifted slightly. He tapped a few notes into his tablet. Perfect. Perfect. That one word echoed like a bell inside me. We spent an hour mapping out his vision. He wasn't just buying houses. He was transforming entire blocks, turning modest streets into upscale enclaves. Property values would triple. The city had already approved infrastructure improvements. New sewage systems, updated electrical, fiber optics. Of course, Will added smoothly. Construction will be disruptive. Noise, dust, limited access for months. Families with code violations or weak finances usually prefer to sell before the chaos begins. I let him see a flicker of sympathy in my expression, the kind a mother shows when warning her child about a storm they can't stop. Yes, I murmured. Some families are better off taking a generous offer now, before the city knocks on their door. Will smiled, closing his tablet with finality. I'd like to make them an offer today. Cash. Quick closing. I. 2 hours later, I found myself walking up the familiar driveway of 1247 Maple Street, clipboard in hand, following Will Hudson to the front door. Through the window, I saw Chelsea's face, her shock clear even from a distance. Brian opened the door, confusion etched across his features. Can I help you? Will extended his business card. Mr. Mitchell, Will Hudson, Hudson Properties. And this is Dorothy, my property assessment consultant. We'd like to discuss a business proposition. Brian's eyes darted to me, disbelief warring with recognition. His mouth opened, then closed. And that was the moment I'd been waiting for. The moment the tables began to turn. Brian stepped aside reluctantly, his eyes flicking between me and Will as if he'd stumbled into a dream he didn't understand. Chelsea appeared behind him, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. The color drained from her face when she saw me holding a clipboard like I belonged there. What is she doing here? Chelsea hissed, her voice sharp enough to slice through the air. Will, always composed, ignored her hostility. May we come in? They hesitated, but politeness, or perhaps shock, overpowered suspicion. Moments later, we sat in their polished living room, the one I had helped furnish with my retirement savings. The room smelled faintly of vanilla candles and entitlement. Will spread his documents across the coffee table. I'll be direct, he said smoothly. Hudson Properties is interested in acquiring this house. We're prepared to offer $450,000, cash, closing within 30 days. Chelsea gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Brian blinked rapidly, his Adam's apple bobbing as though he'd swallowed glass. That's more than we paid? Correct, Will said. A generous profit in a very short time. Chelsea's voice turned brittle. We're not interested in selling. Will tilted his head, sympathetic but firm. I understand. But you should know, Hudson Properties has plans for this entire block. The city has already approved infrastructure upgrades. Construction will be extensive. Road closures, heavy machinery, noise, dust, not to mention code compliance. The word hung in the air like a guillotine. Brian shifted uneasily. Code compliance? I adjusted the clipboard in my lap, my tone calm, professional. The garage conversion. From what I can see, it wasn't permitted. If inspectors find out, they'll require a full review. That could delay construction, increase costs, and put you under scrutiny. Chelsea's face paled, and I savored the crack in her confidence. Will continued, his voice matter of fact. Our assessment suggests multiple properties in this area may face similar issues. If the city demands compliance, owners could be forced to spend tens of thousands to bring everything up to code. Or, he slid the offer letter across the table. They could take our cash offer and walk away with a healthy profit. Silence stretched. Brian stared at the paper, his fingers twitching as if tempted to reach for it. Chelsea shook her head furiously. Number. Absolutely not. This is our home. I leaned back in the chair I'd never been invited to sit in while I lived there. Homes are only as strong as their foundations, I said quietly. And this one? Its foundation is cracked. Chelsea snapped. You planned this. You're trying to ruin us. I met her glare with a smile colder than ice. No, dear. I didn't create the problem. I simply stopped preventing it. Brian's mouth opened, but no words came. His eyes searched my face, maybe hoping for a trace of mercy. But I kept my expression neutral, professional, untouchable. Because in that living room, the very place they had dismissed me as useless, I had never been more powerful. The moment Will and I left their house, I could feel the tension crackling in the air like a storm about to break. Chelsea stood frozen at the window, her face pale and her hand gripping Brian's arm, with the desperation of someone holding on to the edge of a cliff. By the time I reached my apartment, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Brian's name flashed across the screen first. I let it go to voicemail, then Chelsea's number, then Brian again. By the fourth call, I answered. Mom. Brian's voice was high-pitched, almost frantic. What the hell is going on? Who was that man? Why did you… I cut him off gently, my tone steady. Language, Brian. And I believe everything was explained quite clearly. Mr. Hudson is offering to buy your home. You can't do this to us. Chelsea's shrill voice cut in from the background. This is revenge. You're trying to force us out. I chuckled softly. Revenge would imply effort. I didn't create this situation. The city already had its eye on your block. Will Hudson was coming whether I was involved or not. I simply stopped shielding you. There was a long silence, broken only by Chelsea's ragged breathing. Brian tried again, his voice softer now. You knew about the garage. You knew it wasn't permitted. Why didn't you warn us? I did, I said. Back in February, remember? When I asked about the permits and offered to help you file them, I even lined up a contractor. It would have cost about $8,000 and taken 2 weeks. But then you made it clear my presence wasn't wanted. So I canceled it. Chelsea gasped. You mean you had it all arranged? You could have… I could have. I interrupted coldly. But after being called useless and tossed aside, I saw no reason to spend my savings fixing a house I wasn't welcome in. There was another silence. This one heavier. I could almost hear Brian's realization sinking in. Please, Mom, he said finally, his voice breaking. We were wrong. I was wrong. Chelsea didn't mean… Don't. I snapped. Don't insult me with excuses about hormones or stress. She showed me exactly who she is. And you, Brian, you chose to stand by her. Actions have consequences. Chelsea must have grabbed the phone because her voice suddenly filled my ear. Dorothy, please. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I was scared about the baby, and I lashed out. But you can't destroy our lives because of one mistake. I leaned back in my armchair, swirling the wine in my glass. Destroy your lives? No, Chelsea. I'm simply letting you live with the reality you created. The storm was always coming. I just stopped holding the umbrella. I hung up before she could respond. The phone rang again. I silenced it. Then again. I poured another glass of wine and smiled at the quiet. Let them panic. It was only the beginning. It was nearly midnight when the pounding started. Sharp, frantic blows rattling my apartment door. I didn't even need to look through the peephole. I knew exactly who it was. Dorothy! Chelsea's voice cracked through the hallway. Please, open the door. We need to talk. For a long moment, I considered ignoring her, the way I had ignored her calls. But curiosity tugged at me. I wanted to see the face of desperation. I wanted her to know what it felt like to stand outside, unwelcome. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. Chelsea stood there. Mascara streaked across her cheeks, her blouse wrinkled, her belly heavy, with the child she had used as an excuse to discard me. Her eyes were red, swollen from tears. Please, she whispered, her voice trembling. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I leaned against the frame, arms crossed. Wrong? You called me useless. You convinced my son to throw me out of the house I helped you buy. And now, suddenly, I'm not so useless? Chelsea's lip quivered. I was stressed. I didn't mean it. You meant every word, I said coolly. You just didn't expect to choke on the consequences. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Look, I know we've had problems, but we're family. We can fix this together. You said something about a contractor. The permits, if we get them sorted, the house will be fine, right? I let out a bitter laugh. That was going to be my parting gift to you. Everything properly permitted, up to code, ready for the city inspection. But that gift died the day you told me I wasn't wanted. I don't throw pearls before swine. Chelsea. Her face crumpled, tears spilling again. I'll pay you back. Somehow. We'll find the money. Just please, don't let Hudson take our home. Pay me back? I arched an eyebrow. With what money? You and Brian can barely afford groceries between your shopping sprees and his beer tabs. No, Chelsea. You can't buy back respect once you've thrown it away. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing so hard her shoulders shook. For a fleeting second, I almost felt pity. Almost. But then I remembered the coldness in her eyes. The day she told me to get out. Like I was an old appliance being tossed to the curb. I straightened, my voice low but steady. Family doesn't throw each other away. You made sure I understood that I wasn't family. I was just the woman who gave you $40,000 of her retirement savings. You made your bed, Chelsea. Now you get to lie in it. Her sobs quieted into hiccups. She lowered her hands, her face blotchy and broken. So that's it? You'll just let us lose everything? I met her gaze, unflinching. You already lost me. The rest is just collateral. I closed the door slowly, deliberately, leaving her in the hallway with nothing but her tears. 2 days passed before the next knock came at my door. This one was softer, measured. When I opened it, I didn't find Chelsea in tears. Instead, I found Frank and Linda, her parents, standing awkwardly in the hallway, clutching their coats like shields. Dorothy, Linda said gently. May we come in? I hesitated, then stepped aside. At least they had manners. I poured coffee as they settled at my small kitchen table. Frank cleared his throat, his deep voice carrying a weight I recognized instantly. The sound of a father trying to contain his fury. Chelsea told us you've fallen out. Linda began carefully. She said you left after an argument about privacy, that you felt excluded from the baby plans. I raised an eyebrow. That's what she told you? Linda nodded, uncertainty flickering across her face. I slid a manila folder onto the table. Then let me tell you what really happened. Havry. I opened the folder and laid out the city notices. I had kept letters warning that Maple Street was scheduled for infrastructure improvements. Code compliance checks. Imminent. I showed them the contractor estimates, the permit applications, half prepared. And then I repeated Chelsea's exact words from that morning. I don't want a useless old woman here while I'm pregnant. Linda's face went pale. Frank's jaw clenched, his knuckles whitening around his coffee cup. She called you useless? Linda whispered. Among other things. I said calmly. And Brian, my son, stood by her side while she threw me out. All this after I sold my home and handed them $40,000 to make theirs possible. Frank stood abruptly, pacing the room. That little... He stopped himself, shaking his head. We raised her better than this. I'm sure you did. I replied evenly. But comfort breeds cruelty. And she learned quickly how easy it was to discard someone once she thought she didn't need me anymore. Linda reached across the table, her hand trembling. Dorothy, what will it take to fix this? Not just the house, but the family? Her eyes were sincere, searching for hope. For a moment, I almost softened, but then I remembered Chelsea's cold smirk, Brian's silence, the way they erased me from their photos, their lives. Some things, I said quietly, can't be fixed. Chelsea showed me exactly who she is when she thought it was safe to be cruel, and Brian chose to support her instead of defending his mother. That's not a lapse, Linda. That's a revelation of character. Frank stopped pacing, his shoulders sagging. So what happens now? Now, I said, gathering the papers back into the folder. They deal with the consequences of their choices, just like everyone else. The silence that followed was heavy, final. Linda dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Frank muttered something about having a serious conversation with his daughter. As they left, I watched them go with an odd sense of peace. For the first time, someone else had looked at Chelsea and seen what I saw. And that, I thought, was justice in its purest form. I should have known Frank wouldn't leave it at a serious conversation. Fathers, after all, are not immune to blind spots when it comes to their daughters. 3 mornings later, my phone rang. Will Hudson's voice was unusually tense. Dorothy, we've got a problem. The city received a formal complaint claiming Hudson Properties is using intimidation tactics to force families out. They're launching an investigation. I set down my teacup carefully. Who filed the complaint? Frank Morrison, your daughter-in-law's father. Apparently, he's a retired city council member with connections. For the first time in weeks, my blood ran cold. Will, I can explain. You'll need to explain to them. They've requested interviews with everyone involved, including you. Today, by noon, I was sitting in a sterile conference room at City Hall. Across the table sat Detective Sarah Chen, her pen poised like a weapon. She was younger than I expected, sharp-eyed, with the kind of presence that made liars sweat. Mrs. Mitchell, she began, her voice calm, but cutting. Can you explain your relationship with Hudson Properties? I folded my hands neatly. I was recently hired as a property consultant. My role is to identify homes that might benefit from improvement. And your relationship to Brian and Chelsea Mitchell at 1247 Maple Street? They are my son and daughter-in-law. Herr Payne stopped. She looked up, eyebrows arched. You recommended your own son's property for acquisition? I identified it. I corrected gently. As a property with unpermitted work that would inevitably face compliance issues. The city's own notices confirm this. Detective Chen tapped the folder before her. After being asked to move out of that same property, I met her gaze steadily. Yes, they made their position clear. I was no longer welcome. I accepted that. But facts remain facts. A garage conversion without permits is still a violation, regardless of family ties. She leaned back, studying me. Some might see your actions as revenge, Detective, I said quietly. Some might also see my son's actions as elder financial abuse. I sold my home to fund his. I paid rent to live in their garage. I cooked. I cleaned. I supported them. And when I became inconvenient, they discarded me. If I choose to provide accurate information to a developer already evaluating the neighborhood, that is not revenge. That is consulting. The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the wall clock. Finally, Detective Chen closed her notebook. We'll continue our review. But I'll say this off the record. Family disputes like this rarely end well for anyone. Off the record, I replied, my voice calm as stone. Sometimes people need to learn that actions have consequences, even family. 3 days later, Will called again. Relief laced his tone. The investigation is closed. No coercion, no fraud. The city found our procedures clean. And Dorothy, your consulting work was deemed entirely appropriate. I exhaled slowly, a weight lifting. And the complaint? Withdrawn. Frank Morrison apologized this morning. Said he had an enlightening conversation with his daughter. I smiled, gazing out my apartment window at the spring sunlight. Chelsea, it seemed, was running out of allies. By the end of the week, the papers were signed. Brian and Chelsea sold 1247 Maple Street to Hudson Properties for $450,000. They paid off their mortgage, their closing costs, and walked away with a profit of $60,000. To anyone else, it might have looked like a victory, but I saw the truth in Brian's hollow eyes and Chelsea's tight, brittle smile as they handed over the keys. Profit meant nothing when it came wrapped in shame. "Congratulations," I said warmly, shaking their hands as though we were strangers, finalizing a polite transaction. A wise decision, really. Chelsea flinched at my tone. Brian only nodded, his gaze fixed on the floor. They moved into a smaller house in a less polished neighborhood. For once, it was something they could actually afford without my sacrifice propping them up. And in that, perhaps, there was a kind of justice. Months passed. I kept my distance. I had no desire to be their crutch again. But then the call came. The baby had been born. A healthy girl. They named her Dorothy. When I heard that, something inside me cracked, not like glass shattering this time, but like a shell breaking open. Naming her after me was an apology they couldn't speak aloud, a recognition of all I had given and all I had taken back. It was 6 months before we shared a meal again. Not because I was punishing them, but because it took that long for us to relearn how to sit at the same table without pretending nothing had happened. We spoke cautiously, circling each other like wary animals, but slowly, painfully. The shape of a new relationship emerged, not mother as servant, not son as master, but adults, meeting on even ground. Chelsea no longer snapped at me. Brian no longer assumed I would fix his problems. And I no longer offered myself up to be used. One evening, as I left their house, Brian followed me to the door. His voice was low, thick with emotion. "Mom, can you forgive us?" I looked at him for a long time. Really looked. He'd lost weight, his hair thinner, his eyes older than his years. Regret had carved him into a different man. "I can forgive you," I said finally. "But I can't forget what you showed me who you really are when you think it's safe to be cruel. Family isn't about what you're willing to endure. It's about what you're willing to require." His eyes brimmed, but he nodded. He understood. Now, at 65, I live in my own apartment. I work a job I enjoy. I answer to no one. And sometimes, when I visit, my granddaughter reaches for me from her high chair, her tiny voice calling, "Gamma." The first time she said it, I cried not from pain, but from joy, because this child will grow up in a family that finally understands respect. And me? I learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying others. It's refusing to let yourself be their victim ever again. I raised my teacup to the quiet evening light. Here's to new beginnings.